Okay, I'd like to call the meeting of the Joint Subcommittee on Early Childhood Care and Education to order and ask that the roll be called.
Yes, Madam Chair, Senator Howe, you're here. Senator Saslaw.
Here.
Senator Lucas.
Here.
Senator Newman.
Here.
Senator McClellan.
Here.
Delegate Plum. Delegate McQuinn.
Here.
Delegate Hurst.
Here.
Delegate Jones.
Here.
And Delegate Davis.
Here.
Great, I'm glad we have such a good turnout this afternoon, and I would like to welcome the members as well as any public that may be following our work. I'm excited today that we will be discussing how we can continue to support our youngest learners and their families during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Prior to the 2020 regular session, this joint subcommittee primarily focused its work on the Virginia Preschool Initiative and improving school readiness. However, in the past session, the subcommittee gained additional responsibility to oversee the implementation of the unified public-private system for early childhood care and education. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic forcing additional challenges on the early childhood system, the transition of early childhood care from the Department of Social Services to the Department of Education remains on track. Today's meeting will allow us to hear from the ongoing transition work and the impacts of COVID-19 on early childhood programs. First Lady Pamela Northam will provide opening remarks on the administration's ongoing work to strengthen the early childhood system. She will be followed by Daphne Bazuk, Associate Professor at the University of Virginia, discussing her research on the experiences of Virginia's early educator workforce. And then Jenna Conway, Virginia's Chief School Readiness Officer, will provide an update on the early childhood transition implementation, Virginia Preschool Initiative, and the response to COVID-19. And finally, Kathy Glesser, president of the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, will update us on the Mixed Delivery Grants Program. It's a very full agenda, so let's get started. First Lady Northam, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Howell, and thanks to the members of the subcommittee for dedicating your valuable time in prioritizing Virginia's littlest learners. It's great to see you all again. So many friends who have been working overtime since our last meeting to help Virginia children and families weather this public crisis. This has been a very long, tough year for every Virginia family, but we've had some incredible victories as well. And that gives me great hope for a brighter future for our Commonwealth. Thanks to you all and your courageous leadership, earlier this year, we passed transformative legislation that will build a stronger, more equitable early childhood care and education system for years to come. Despite this pandemic, our dedicated teams at the Department of Social Services and Education are still on track, as the Senator mentioned, to fully transition oversight of our early learning to the Department of Education before next July's deadline, which I think is amazing. Jenna Conway, our Chief School Readiness Officer, amazing mom of 3, is here today and will share more details with you shortly. This legislation also included an innovative pilot program for at-risk 3-year-olds in our Virginia Preschool Initiative classrooms that we are confident will demonstrate a marked improvement in school readiness for children who need it the most. While we were pretty disappointed for the financial downturn that the impact this COVID has had on our historic funding, we were able to quickly make a total of over $140 million in emergency federal funding available over the past 8 months to help stabilize the childcare and early learning fields and to ensure working families have access to quality care during this time. Virginia was one of the first states in the nation to offer a plan for getting these funds directly out to the field. And your dedication to continuing this funding during special session is making a powerful impact for providers who need it the most. I talked to one child care provider out in the Southwest who said overnight she went from almost 100 children to less than 30. It has such an incredible impact on their bottom line, their ability to even pay rent for their buildings, let alone get PPE and cleaning supplies. So thank you all so very much for helping them and helping us to stay moving forward during this time. They truly are the unsung heroes of this pandemic and have been our early educators, really been them who've gone above and beyond to adapt to changing health and safety guidelines. And they've kept outbreaks remarkably low. Over 2,000 childcare providers remain open today thanks to this dedicated, talented workforce. Yet we all know they remain woefully underpaid. That's why we were so grateful to the legislature for working hard during special session, long special session, to reallot key items in our funding package, especially the $3 million worth of early educator incentive grants, which have dramatically increased teacher retention rates in childcare centers and family day homes, where we know teachers are overwhelmingly women of color and are paid less than their peers in school-based settings. We're fortunate today to have Dr. Daphne Basak from UVA with us today to provide more details, and I hope she'll correct us all on the pronunciation of her name. Now, as we move forward, we must be laser focused on adequate funding to maximize access to quality slots and to support our early childhood educators. Our friend Kathy Glacier is here from the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation to update you on the critical role mixed delivery plays in allowing more children and families to be served across the Commonwealth. Finally, I will note that the talented and charming David Carey from my team will now be sharing his time with the Secretary of Education. I'm not sure how I feel about sharing, but he's now our Assistant Secretary for Early Childhood Care and Education and will be the administration's point of contact for this issue during session. So you know you have a trusted friend who's very knowledgeable to call on. We'll have a lot more to share in the coming weeks regarding the governor's proposed budget, and we look forward to continuing to work with each of you and your talented staff at House Appropriations and Senate Finance to ensure that all Virginia children have the tools they need to succeed in school and beyond. Especially now, it's our best way to get our children back on track and our economy as well. So thank you all so very much for this terrific investment, for your investment of time, and I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in person again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, First Lady. Your dedication to this topic and to the children of Virginia is really inspirational, and I think we have made much more progress than we would have had you not been there. And I'm looking forward to continuing collaborating, as I'm sure all members of this joint subcommittee are as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we are going to hear about a report on the divergent experiences of early childhood education in schools and the child care centers during COVID. And Daphne, okay, tell us how to pronounce your last name. Basak? Are you
guys? Can you guys hear me okay?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much for letting me join you and speak to the group today. My name is Daphne Basak. And I'll be talking about a set of work I've been doing with Jenna Conway and Kathy Glazer and their teams as part of the Preschool Development Grant in Virginia, with a focus on the early childhood workforce, how they have been doing during COVID, as well as the results from the first year of the Early Educator Incentive, which I'm extremely excited to share with you all. So as the First Lady noted, the early childhood workforce plays a really, really immense role in anything we talk about with quality in early childhood settings. And when we talk about early childhood opportunities making a difference in young children's lives, that is driven from the women, largely women who are working with those kids every day. And COVID has had a really major impact on this workforce, particularly among teachers working in childcare centers and family childcare homes. And these impacts of COVID have huge implications for young children and families and any of the investments we're talking about today around quality improvement. When the people who take care of young children are themselves in poverty and are struggling and are hit with extremely hard financial challenges, it is very difficult for them to provide the stable and high quality early childhood experiences that young kids need. So what I want to do today is share with you findings from a large survey we did of Virginia early educators right after COVID hit, so around May of 2020. And I want to sort of highlight the differences in the experiences of early educators working in childcare centers relative to those early childhood teachers working in our public school systems. And then after I show you that, I'm also very excited to share results from our evaluation of Virginia's early childhood teacher recognition program, which I think are incredibly exciting results, and I'd be happy to discuss and answer any questions you might have. So very quickly, I wanted to sort of give you an overview of who we are talking about when we talk about Virginia's early educators. So our survey here was of 1,600 early educators in Virginia, including childcare teachers, Head Start teachers, school-based pre-K teachers, leads and assistant teachers, floaters, really everyone working in these early childhood settings. We also had a separate survey that I won't talk about today, but showed similar results for family childcare home teachers. And amazingly, though this was in kind of a very hard moment within the pandemic, we heard from 75% of the early educators that we reached out to, a really, really high response rate, which gives us sort of confidence in the results we'll share with you today. So our sample, like I said, was about 1,600 teachers. And here I just wanted to show you as a starting point how different the workforce in early childhood centers looks compared to those in schools. So for example, you could see that about 100% of the teachers, lead teachers in public schools have bachelor's degrees compared to only a third of the lead teachers working in childcare centers. And fully 40% of lead teachers working in childcare centers have household incomes that are under $25,000 per year. So a lot of the teachers working in childcare centers, both the lead and assistant teachers, are themselves in poverty, something we don't see among educators working in the public school system. And the other thing to note is that the racial composition of these two workforces is quite different as well. We see many more Black and Hispanic women working among child care centers than we do in public schools. And so I wanted to sort of stop and highlight that because the teachers who work in our child care centers look very similar in racial composition to the children in Virginia. And we know that the kind of racial match between the teachers and the kids who go to childcare centers plays a real role in children's learning, and as well as what I showed you on the last slide around the high poverty levels of teachers also playing an impact in the quality of experiences young children have. So just sort of off the bat, before we talk about COVID impact, the two groups are really, really different groups. Once COVID hit, it had a profoundly different impact for childcare centers relative to schools. So you can see that childcare centers, as of May 2020, about half of them, a little more than half, were closed, and about a third of them were open, but just to serve the children of critical workers. And this was in contrast, as you know, to what happened to the public schools, which all switched to remote instruction. And the decision to close or open as a child care center, and if to stay open, how to deal with with oftentimes large drops in enrollment, had serious implications for the teachers working in these sites. So here we're showing the percentage of lead teachers in childcare centers that reported in May that they were either no longer employed, or they were employed and not working. And you can see that is about 35% of teachers. We also see that 35% of lead teachers in childcare centers experience drops in earnings, and obviously much, much higher than what we saw in the public school system. And we asked teachers a bunch about their financial well-being and how things were going for them in those early months of COVID. And what I'll share with you here is just a few measures of financial instability. And so these say things like, I worry I will run out of money before I am paid again. And you can see that over a third of childcare lead teachers and assistant teachers reported those type of concerns. Much, much lower, less than half among public school teachers. There are disagreements in my house about money. We have bills that are overdue. So for all these, we see much, much higher levels of financial stress among childcare teachers than we do around the public school early childhood workforce. And these ones are even sort of more profound financial stress. These are measures of food insecurity. So worrying that your food would run out, or that you just did not have enough money to pay for food that you needed for yourself or your family. And you can see that for all these measures, it's about 30% or sometimes even above a third of the childcare workforce who is reporting struggles accessing food, compared to much, much lower rates in those dark gray bars, which are the lead teachers working in the public schools. And even the assistant teachers in the public schools look closer to the lead teachers than in the public school system than they do to the kind of profound poverty levels we're seeing among childcare teachers. And the last one I wanted to show you is the access to healthcare benefits. That first set of columns on top is the percentage of teachers that reported not having healthcare benefits at all. Over 10% of lead and assistant teachers in childcare settings don't have access at all. And in the next set of bars, we're looking at access through your employer. And here we see that only 40% have access through their employer. So overall, over half of childcare teachers either don't have insurance through their employer or don't have insurance at all. And this is striking because these were the teachers who were actually going in and interacting with people in person. So much, much different than the risk experienced by many of the teachers at this point in time who are working fully, teachers in public schools who are working fully remotely. So overall, the findings from the survey highlighted really profound levels of financial insecurities among early educators, particularly in the childcare workforce, with 2 out of 5 reporting that they're struggling to access food. I didn't show you these figures, but also a large group saying they're struggling to pay for their medical needs, they don't have access to healthcare, etc. And these conditions are really problematic, not just for the women themselves who are having these experiences, but through what we know about the experiences of young children when their teachers are depressed. We saw a very large increase in depression among childcare workers during the pandemic. Their teachers are struggling to get food. Their teachers are turning over at very high rates because of life circumstances. And we wanted to note that although these are really, really jarring for us disparities between childcare workforce and the school-based workforce, they are not COVID-specific disparities. They are disparities to a large extent that we also saw before COVID. And so they highlight these long-standing differences in how we treat early educators, which create a huge challenge to large-scale efforts to improve early childhood opportunities in Virginia. And so I think they have sort of raised the need for investments in the early childhood workforce, with the notion that by supporting early educators, it's probably our most direct way to ensuring higher quality experiences for children and move towards increases in school readiness and other measures of well-being. So with that, I wanted to quickly tell you about the teacher recognition program, and Jenna will share a lot more details about this, but I'm incredibly excited about this program and also the opportunity to evaluate it and show you what a profound difference this recognition program, which was a financial incentive for early educators, had for the childcare workforce in Virginia. So many of you may know about this, but last year, Virginia used nearly $3 million from our preschool development grant to pilot an innovative early childhood teacher incentive. And the idea was we want to support early educators. We want to give them additional resources that will help improve quality, improve stability, reduce turnover, and hopefully through those mechanisms, improve the experiences of young children in the Commonwealth. So what the recognition program did is it offered early educators $1,500. And the way you remained eligible is by staying in your particular site where you were working at the beginning of the program. It was offered to teachers, assistant teachers, really anyone working directly with children 0 to 5 for 30 hours a week or more. So full-time workers, and this was Head Start, pre-K, any kind of program. And we were really excited about the program and also very excited that Jen and her team were really open to letting us do a rigorous evaluation of this to try to learn, does it work? In what ways does it work for who? So that we can develop something sustainable. There were a lot more early childhood programs than we could feasibly serve. And so that gave us a scenario where we could use a lottery to determine which sites were going to have access to this program and which sites were not. In most of Virginia, all PDG sites were eligible, but in this one community, because it was so large and we were in the pilot year, we didn't have enough resources, and we were able to use a lottery to determine this. So I'm going to show you the results from 75 sites and 584 teachers, where what we did is we had some sites who were eligible to receive up to $1,500 in 3 payments of $500. And in the comparison group, in those sites, they did not participate in the program at all. And what we did is we then tracked what happened to those teachers, especially in what I'll show you today, what happened to the likelihood they stayed at their site. So the first thing I'll show you from this one county when we did the work is that over a very short period, 8 months, 75% of the teachers who we saw started a program were still there 8 months later, meaning 25% of teachers left within an 8-month period, which is a much, much higher rate than what you see in the public school system, with a quarter of teachers leaving. Now what I'll show you is what happened for those teachers that received the offer to receive $1,500. So as you can see, 86% of those teachers stayed, which means that we increased the likelihood that teachers stayed at their site by 11 percentage points, a very, very large increase. And one thing to note is that in these results, we are showing you all teachers. So this is childcare teachers, Head Start teachers, pre-K teachers working in public schools. But we know from what I showed you at the beginning that the experiences of childcare teachers are just far, far different than those of teachers working in the public school system. So I also want to briefly show you what happens when I break up the results for childcare teachers compared to those teachers working in school-based settings. The first thing to note is the teacher turnover is just much, much higher in childcare centers. So that first blue bar is showing you that in childcare centers in this one urban community, fully 30% of the teachers that we saw working at the start of the study were not there 8 months later. 30% of teachers leaving during the school year while serving those kids. In the public school system, teachers stay at much higher rates. You can see that 94% of the teachers that were there at the beginning were still there later, so showing that turnover in itself is just a much bigger issue within the childcare system. And now I'll show you what happened for those teachers who received the $1,500 incentive. You can see that in the public schools, this had basically no impact. So basically, there was not very high turnover to begin with, and it remained at those levels. But in childcare centers, there was a huge increase in teacher retention, whereas 30% of teachers left when they weren't offered this money. We cut that in half so that only 15% of teachers left if we offered them the $1,500, which Jenna points out regularly is an increase of roughly 75 cents an hour. And so we were very, very struck by the results. And and the kind of relatively low-cost way in which we could improve turnover, and through that improve the stability that young children experience. And we know from lots of research that when children have access to a stable teacher for extended periods of times, they learn more and show greater growth in development than when they experience higher levels of turnover. We asked the teachers, I'll just wrap this up pretty quick, but we asked the teachers in our surveys what they did with these resources, how they used them. And you can see that although we told teachers they could use the resources for whatever they wanted, the vast majority of teachers said they used the funds, the $1,500, for very basic needs. They cited food, housing, bills, medical costs. And so really supporting these teachers to meet a basic living wage to afford things that they needed made this impact so they could stay in their position for a longer time and improve the stability that young kids experience. And I'll just sort of wrap up with this quote written by one of the teachers on the survey. "Early educators are so often left out of the conversation when it comes to teaching. This grant has shown that our work matters. I am hopeful that one day being respected and recognized for what we do will be a norm in our society." So overall, what we took away from this is that Virginia's Teacher Recognition Program, which I should pause it and say is the first program like that I'm aware of in the country, and certainly the first study we've had to evaluate the impact. So very excited that Virginia is sort of leading the way on something like this and that the results have been so large and exciting. It's a unique approach. Our findings suggest that a $1,500 incentive cut turnover rates in half, from 30% of teachers leaving to 15% of teachers leaving. And we are confident, but continuing to study how improving this stability in child care center leads to improvements in young children's development, in the experiences families have, and ultimately in the quality of our early childhood system in the Commonwealth. So I will stop there, and I would be excited to answer any questions you all may have.
Hey, are there any questions? I have one. It seems to me that given that this was a one-time pilot program not being continued as far as we know, wouldn't one expect that the numbers would revert back to what they were before?
So absolutely. I think that when you get the payments were a one-time moment, and we wouldn't expect that giving teachers $1,500 once is going to continually help them, especially when we're talking about this high level of poverty. At the same time, we are hopeful that we can continue finding resources to address sort of compensation for early educators. And this year, we are in the second year of working on this. Jenna will talk about changes to the recognition program this year. We have sort of altered the resources in some ways to focus specifically on family childcare teachers and childcare center teachers, because that's where we saw the biggest sort of return on the investment. And our hope is that by sort of showing continual benefits from this and testing the impacts for teachers and for children, ultimately we can make a strong case about the importance of these kinds of investments.
Anybody else have a question? Well, I have another one. We're going to be slowly, way too slowly, increasing the minimum wage. I'm wondering, will that impact on this particular workforce?
I mean, so for sure it will, in the sense that many of the teachers here, especially the assistant teachers working in childcare centers, where we saw by far the greatest impacts, are making minimum wage as it is. So there's a portion of the population for which that matters. There are other teachers in that the teachers in this workforce are making on average $35,000 a year. So it is a very low pay workforce.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. That was really helpful.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Next is Jenna Conway, the Chief School Readiness Officer, who's going to be speaking about the implementation of the statewide unified early childhood care and education system. We need an acronym for that. It's too many words. And let's see. And also she'll talk about the COVID-19 impacts on early childhood education. Jenna.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, First Lady. I'm also joined today by Commissioner Storin from the Department of Social Services. We've been working very closely throughout this transition and supporting the pandemic. And also huge thanks to Daphne and Kathy for their continued partnership. Tyler, are you going to show my slides? I'm not seeing them.
Yes, Jenna, sorry, my system's settings have changed, and make sure it's allowing it to work.
Excellent. So what I'd like to do as Tyler's pulling those up is basically, I'll actually start with the overall COVID impact. I think important to note, building on Daphne's presentation, really talk about the Birth to 5 system, but talk specifically about childcare, schools, and Head Start, and what the sort of the impact has been across those sectors. Again, noting some of the disparities that Daphne pointed out. I'll then talk about next steps with that educator incentive. Daphne teed you up with some evidence on what worked in Virginia, and very excited to your question, Senator Howell, to note on how we are going to continue this forward using a combination of federal dollars and some state dollars that you all recently allocated. I'll then provide a brief update on the transition you will be receiving. Today is December 1st. We have formally submitted our transition work group plan, which is a much more detailed, I will spare you all those details, but just giving you an update on where we are, on moving all of the responsibilities for childcare to the Department of Education. And then foreshadowing, we are still a few weeks away from the governor's budget, but just letting you know, kind of speaking on behalf of the state and from the bird's eye view of all of our programs, what we see some of the critical needs as we go into session. Next slide, please. And if you'll go one more, Tyler. Absolutely. So wanted to present just sort of what is the impact on COVID-19. I think Daphne gave us a snapshot of the kind of the workforce as of May, and you saw some of those disparities, particularly around the workforce and the childcare workforce being kind of majority folks, women of color, and being sort of, either having kind of not having work and sort of having reductions in wages or having to work on the front lines and not necessarily having health care. What I'd like to do is briefly take you through, I won't read every word on the slides, but give you a sense of what's going on in schools, what's going on in Head Start, and then kind of where we are today in childcare, both those centers and family day homes. So basically, as it relates to school-based early childhood, mostly things like Virginia Preschool Initiative and Early Childhood Special Education, all of those places, as per the governor's order, really closed and moved to remote learning in the spring and are in the process of all are now open this fall, although in a variety of formats. And in a second, I'll show you the map, but we've got full in-person, partial in-person, hybrid, fully remote, and that also tends to be fairly dynamic based on what's happening with local COVID cases and transmission. We have, from the get-go, based on both the science and the challenges around providing remote learning to young learners, always encouraged our school divisions to prioritize early learners, so preschool and kindergarten, as well as special education for in-person services where possible. As of a week or so ago, we have some of the enrollment data and want to kind of give you a sense of where we are. Overall, we have roughly 13% fewer 4-year-olds enrolled in this fall. You'll see that roughly it's just under 17,000 based to roughly about 19,000 last year. We think that's a variety of reasons. Folks are opting out of preschool. Folks might not be interested in virtual. We know there's a lot of fear out there, and we also know that it's a lot of sort of families are balancing multiple kids in remote learning, and preschool sometimes ends up being the kind of the thing that has to give, even though, I know that parents know how important preschool is. We are hoping to be able to address this, and I'll talk a little bit more about this waiver flexibility, but we are continuing to work with school divisions. Normally, they kind of complete their preschool enrollment in the fall, but using some appropriations language and Superintendent Lane's flexibility, waiver flexibility, we're actually asking school divisions, some preschool is better than no preschool, and so encouraging kind of ongoing enrollment. And our school divisions are reporting to us that they might be able to fill that gap, roughly about 3,000 slots by January, which would put us right about at last year's enrollment. We don't know quite yet the impact on early childhood special education. That count is happening as of December 1st, so we'll get that information and have that information to you all by session. So enrollment, big picture enrollment is down, although thanks to waiver flexibility, we're continuing to enroll, and our school divisions think they can get pretty darn close to the 19,000 kids that we had in DPI, sort of similar to last year. When it relates to the experience, I'll say it's tough. And some of you know, as the First Lady noted, I am the parent of young children, and I have a virtual kindergartner downstairs. And I will say that virtual preschool and virtual kindergarten is pretty darn tough for little kids, right? It just is not the same. So much of it is about play and development of social emotional skills. And our teachers and educators across the state are working so hard to figure out how to engage kids, to connect, to provide a variety of materials and resources and engaging instructional experiences, but it's just much, much tougher than it may be sort of for some of the older grades. We are working very closely with the field to support our educators, all of whom are pioneering this, right? Figuring out how you do this. And we also know that we have to continue to do this, even in the places that are offering in person for our younger learners. Many families, including many of our Black families and many of our Latino families, would still prefer virtual because they simply don't feel like it's safe enough to send their kids back, right? And so really being kind of cognizant of, we imagine for the rest of the year, even as local school divisions make their decisions, there'll be some kids in virtual preschool, and we as the state need to be able to support that. We also are deeply worried about our most vulnerable kids, including our kids with special needs or developmental delays. And so we're closely monitoring. We're seeing lower referrals. Largely, again, I think there's sort of two things going on. One of which is parents are less likely to kind of reach out for help if they don't really want people in their homes or don't really want to kind of take their kids out of their homes. We also know that far fewer kids are in settings where educators, whether it's lead teachers or assistant teachers, can observe kids and sort of raise a flag and say, hey, it seems like Johnny is maybe a little delayed in this area. Let's go ahead and get him checked out. And so we think we're sort of seeing lower referrals for early childhood special education services. All of our school divisions, as required by federal law, are doing evaluations. Some are in person, some are virtual. So nearly 87% or nearly 90% are offering in person if parents want it. But again, we're still seeing lower activity than we typically do, which means for us, one, we're most worried about our vulnerable kids, and two, we'll have our work cut out for us as we kind of bring all these kids back, whether it's the remainder of this school year into next year, really making sure we have good systems in place to evaluate kids and get connected to intervention services if that's necessary. Next slide, please. This gives you then the map in terms of the kind of as of November 12th, and this is on the VDOE website at any point in time, but the decisions that, as you see, are kind of made locally about in-person, which is purple, partial in-person, which is the darker yellow, hybrid, partial hybrid, and then sort of fully remote. And again, you see sort of different things happening in different areas. I will say that Southwest and sort of the western part of the state opened earlier and tended to offer some in person relative to sort of more of our urban areas. There's been some shifts there back and forth. And again, this is fairly dynamic. I think even with some places planning to come back this month or last month, November or December, and then the recent uptick in cases sort of affecting some of those decisions. So as I've said, what we're prepared to do is to track this, and then we are throughout the remainder of the school year, assuming that we'll be supporting both in-person and virtual preschool, and making sure that we're providing the flexibility as well as the supports and services to support whatever modality school divisions might be using. Next slide, please. Wanted to let you know, in light of all of this, in terms of what's going on with the pandemic, we've still been able, as the First Lady noted, to implement many of the changes that you all voted for as a result of the appropriations language from last year. So we were able to redistribute slots. So we, even throughout the pandemic, did enrollment in the spring. As of May 15th, got what schools, what school divisions were interested in, and were able to kind of reallocate places that had more kids that they wanted to serve than available slots to give those slots, and then reduce those places that didn't have as many kids to serve. We were able to launch our pilot for 3-year-olds and had far more 3-year-olds, families and divisions interested in serving 3-year-olds than we expected, and were able to use the reallocation of the state dollars and the federal dollars. So initially we thought we'd serve 500. We had over 1,000 requests, and right now we have just over 730 3-year-olds being served. We've been able to work with community providers, really important. As Daphne noted, childcare tends to be more open and in person, and so some families who are working out of the home need that. And so nearly 460 4-year-olds and over 100 3-year-olds are served in community provider settings, thanks to the flexibility provided last year, and we're again using some of the ratio flexibility. So we were able to take some of those changes that came recommended from Executive Directive 4 and put them in motion using a combination of state and federal dollars. I'll talk about that in a second, but really wanted you to know the things that you called for last year, we've been able to execute on all of those, albeit in a slightly different way than we expected. And as I said, noted earlier, sort of slightly lower enrollment, but we were hoping to get back to right around 19,000 kids by January. Next slide, please. This one summarizes the impact on Head Start. And again, this is 3 and 4-year-olds. These are your most vulnerable 3 and 4-year-olds. They have to be below the federal poverty line. About 10% of them are children with special needs or disabilities. And as you see here, only about 10% are fully in person. And so whether that's program preference or parent preference, you still see a lot of virtual learning, about 1 in 5 of our programs, and then lots of places are a hybrid. They just couldn't bring everybody back at once. And so doing a few days in person, a few days at home, and across the board, offering all families the opportunity to do fully virtual if that's what they've preferred. We're having trouble enrolling in Head Start, again, across the board. You see this in K-12, you see this in VPI, and in Head Start. And so working very closely to continue to enroll folks. What we're largely hearing is parents are sort of staying home and saying, we just have to forego preschool, not our choice, but like with everything going on, I'm dealing with a health crisis, I'm dealing with an eviction crisis, you know, that sort of something has to give here. And so really working with our 50 grantees across the state to kind of get them back up to enrollment and make sure that we can continue to bring in that full $128 million in federal dollars that we bring in and use here in the Commonwealth to serve our most vulnerable kids and families. I think similarly, our Head Start teachers have done a remarkable job of innovating and offering Head Start virtually or offering it only a few days a week. It's still hard, right? Again, these are sort of our families that are in most crisis or facing the most challenges. And so really trying to kind of both support the child, and as you know, the kind of 2-generation services support the families during these tough times has been, continues to be a real challenge for our Head Start programs. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I think where are we today in terms of childcare? So as Daphne noted, we had roughly about in the spring, half of the system open, half of the system closed. We are step by step bringing providers back. As of it today, we have about 70% of the system open, with just under 2,000 providers still closed. We're still not at full capacity, so you'll see that we have providers open, but we still, even with our providers open, not many of them are reporting that they're at full capacity. Largely to kind of keep the space, to kind of make sure that they can keep kids and staff and provide adequate space for social distancing. Our family day homes have just done an incredible job. 85% of them are open. They have been open from March 13th to present, have really served as a lifeline, particularly for our essential workers who've had to work on the front line. And our providers have also really stepped up. And so for those parents who have to work out of the home where virtual learning is happening, either fully virtual learning on those off days when they're not in person, half of our childcare providers across the state are now supporting school-age children through virtual learning. So these are kids who are enrolled in the school division, but sitting, at a kiosk or at a desk in the childcare center, accessing their virtual school. I'll talk in a second about all of the CARES funding. It's been incredibly important to kind of sustaining the industry, although it doesn't even begin to cover the financial loss. And again, as I said before, half of the system is closed because either parents are too afraid to come back or the economics don't work. They just don't have enough kids to come back. We are trying to support those open providers, whether it's CARES money or working closely with the Department of Emergency Management to get materials, PPE, facial coverings, gloves, no-touch thermometers. Everybody's doing this, has done a really good job of keeping outbreaks in childcare low. And largely that's due to the incredible nimbleness of our family childcare and childcare centers. And similarly, I'll talk about in a second, some of the waivers we provided to childcare, trying to support the field as they stay open. Staffing is the biggest concern, and we'll talk a little bit around this. Incentive is so important, but as you might imagine, you've heard about these pods. You've got sort of a whole bunch of the workforce that is now working in smaller settings, either kind of in homes or is sort of supporting the pods. And the pod teachers are getting paid anywhere from $15 to $25 to $30 an hour, right, to work with 4 kids. that becomes a much more attractive option than $10 an hour in the child care center, right, with no health benefits. And so across the board, from Southwest Virginia to Tidewater to Fairfax, we are really hearing, as school has restarted this fall, that it is incredibly difficult to hire childcare. And we are sort of, as soon as we have sort of the dual crisis of, one, we got to get everybody back and operational, and two, we got to make sure these classrooms are staffed, because you can't serve full capacity unless you have full staffing. Next slide, please. This chart summarizes the relief funding to support the field. On the left-hand column, you've got the Department of Education funds. Here's where you see where we used some of the GEAR Act, that's the governor's education funding, to basically execute some of the changes that you all proposed into VPI. So adding the 3-year-olds, providing more flexibility, providing more funding to VECF mixed delivery, which has been so important, and Kathy will talk more about this during the pandemic. We've also been able to support emergency childcare, and then there's also some CARES funding to Head Start, so kind of supporting them even with their lower enrollment. On the right-hand column, you've got the funds that have flowed through Commissioner Storin and the Department of Social Services. They have done an incredible job standing up one of the country's first direct cash assistance to providers. So as we went out there, Commissioner Storin, myself, did a series in partnership with the foundation, did a series of webinars and listening sessions, and folks had different needs. Some folks needed PPE, some folks needed additional dollars to support staff. Some people wanted to do hero or shero bonuses for hazard pay. And so really what we thought would be most beneficial to the field is just get the dollars to folks that are open. And so we've done 2 rounds and are now preparing to use the $60 million in the CRF funding that you all just called for to support direct cash to open childcare and open family day home centers, right? So to keep them open and hopefully increasing their capacity so they continue to serve more kids. We also helped stabilize our childcare subsidies. So these are the vouchers that go to our working low-income families. So waiving those co-payments for families in the spring, and then helping to kind of pay for enrollment. So if a family didn't feel safe to send their child, we were able to stabilize the bottom line for those providers so we wouldn't lose them as part of our subsidy program. And our level 1 providers are unlicensed, our family day home program. So again, we've increased the reimbursement rate because they have just been these heroes, and really I should say heroines of this crisis in terms of staying open for some of our most vulnerable communities, our immigrant communities, our non-English language speaking communities, our rural communities, really making sure that we're funding those at a higher rate to address some of their additional costs related to the pandemic. We are working quickly to kind of take the GA's action as of the beginning of last month and get those remaining Corona relief funds out to programs. A lot of that will be in direct cash assistance to providers. Again, this is open providers, whether or not you take subsidy or not. We want to stabilize the entire childcare sector, as well as some additional new supports for school-age childcare. So working in partnership, DSS, with the foundation, with our Smart Beginnings across the state and really our underserved areas to make sure that we can support safe, supervised virtual learning for our kids whose families have to work. And that's continued to be a challenge throughout the pandemic. We can't bring our economy back if parents don't have access to safe, stable, either childcare or support for virtual learning. Next slide, please. And this just briefly summarizes, I think some folks were interested in how both Commissioner Storin and Superintendent James Lane had used the waiver flexibility provided in the Appropriations Act to support families. So you see some flexibility on timelines, you see flexibility on ongoing enrollment, you see flexibility. We've asked for flexibility for you all in sort of the market rate because our markets are so distorted right now. For licensing, we've tried to be more flexible with providers, right? We want folks to be focused on opening and being safe, sort of waiving kind of some of the in-person stuff, waiving some of the fees, and then making it easier for families to access the subsidy program, stay on the subsidy program. We don't want to create any additional barriers for providers or families during this difficult time. We want to provide a brief update. When I met with you last year, I think we talked a lot about,
sorry, I was going to say, if anybody has a question on this first part, now would be a good time to ask it.
Yep.
Okay.
Madam,
yes.
Yeah, Madam Chair, yeah, Delegate McQuinn. I just wanted to go, Chair, thank you for all of that information and just informing us and keeping us abreast of what's going on. I guess a couple of questions I wanted to ask. I know that we put in, I'm trying to go back to the page, I think it was the page before this one, where we looked at supporting children and as well in early childhood, as well as communities that were establishing programs. They may not have had traditionally had a program there, but they were establishing programs to help address the basically, there were stabilization funds to help address what was going on out in the community. And I know so much about it because I was out there trying to help identify places, and particularly like the faith community where there were basements or fellowship halls and whatnot, to give for opportunities to catch those kids who weren't going to any kind of facility to be educated. So there was money that we put in, and it seems to be reduced by $12.6 million. Can you tell me what is going on with that? And as we look at the landscape and the attendance, how are things going as it relates to that? Because there has been a big problem. Matter of fact, there have been, just last week, there was a church who had child care forever, who shut down and called another faith community to ask, someone in the faith community to ask, could they take those young people, those kids that they had historically had in their institution. So the question is, we have a problem, and I'm not sure taking away funds while we are trying to address that is a great idea. But anyway, you can sort of let me know what.
Yeah. No, I think it's an important point, and I think we're supporting it in really two ways, Delegate. I think as it relates to the kind of the emergency childcare sort of set up in the spring or set up more recently, anybody who was open, right, was eligible for the kind of the CARES grant. So you didn't have to be formally part of the subsidy program. And I know that, that was incredible work that happened in the spring. Some of our Ys, our Boys and Girls Clubs, some of our faith-based institutions, as you noted, stepped up and, providing some cash assistance, some flexible cash assistance to folks that was open was one avenue. We've had a variety of different approaches there. On the left-hand column here, you'll see we thought we would have a lot more schools sort of potentially interested in standing up kind of emergency childcare in the spring. And it just turned out that, that wasn't as much of a need as sort of expected. And so what sort of started initially as $1 million went down to 16,000. And what we did was then sort of, provided the 16,000 to the schools and then took the remainder and plugged it right back into the CARES grants, right? Or the kind of just the direct cash assistance to those programs that are open and kind of, and just providing that support there. I think as it relates to the school age childcare, right now we're tackling. So we do have that kind of $4 million right now in the kind of current contract with the Smart Beginnings. The challenge there is the time sort of strings attached to those dollars. They have to be expended right by the end of this year or sort of shortly thereafter. And so, thinking about how we get those dollars out to support childcare, anything that wouldn't be used for school age, we would likely then just plow into the kind of the CARES 3. So again, sort of getting all of the CRF dollars that you all called for, we would certainly get them out to the field. I think the question is whether it's better suited for school age or just sort of more generally to those open childcare, and that would include anybody that's known to DSS. So it could be sort of faith-based, it can be private childcare that takes subsidy, it can be family childcare. All of those are receiving those. So I think that there was a little bit of a sort of a miscommunication there, Delegate, but we are committed to getting all of those CRF funds out to childcare. It's just figuring out which of those channels makes the most sense. We wouldn't want to reduce that. We continue to hear that their costs to operate are higher. They have to have more staff, right? They can't have sort of rotating teachers in the same rooms. We know that they have additional cleaning materials, and what they're saying is just we still need, they have under enrollment. We still just need cash to be able to operate. And so we're committed to doing that with all of the CRF funds.
Okay, great. Madam Chair.
Yes.
just a follow-up question. Let me ask this question because when I heard about, again, that institution that have been doing childcare forever, the fact that they shut down to me was really disconcerting. So how are we publicizing that there are resources to help stabilize these programs until we get, I guess, past this crisis or this pandemic period, with the understanding that we still have kids who are not in any kind of facility. They're, when it's been warmer, they're on the playground in the morning. You come through there at 12, they're still on the playground. And so, and that is a problem. And I have called them, you know, I've sort of probably shouldn't be giving them a name, but there was a period when we talked about the child, the sort of the crack kids, okay, kids who parents were, you know, on crack, and then these kids were really, as it relates to when they got into the schools, there was a problem in terms of their learning ability. They were so far behind. We're going to have a population of COVID kids who are so far behind, and the resources we're going to need to help get them caught up and to, you know, infuse just opportunities for them to learn. It is going to be extremely difficult. We're going to have another problem, but there's a large population of kids right now that aren't going anywhere. And so I guess it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are getting every child, you know, that we can find, can identify into some kind of learning environment. And so how are we putting this information out there? How are we publicizing, and particularly to communities that are more disadvantaged and more challenging communities?
Absolutely. No, I think there's two key points there. First of which is absolutely, I think the $1 million question that everybody's deeply concerned about is our missing kids, right? And our missing kids, you know, our missing preschoolers, as I noted before, our missing early elementary kids, right? And the sort of the fallout from that, and how do we reach them now and get them for some school this year or some preschool this year, which again, some of the additional flexibility, get them into some kind of childcare or sort of supportive setting, I think is critically important. And I know that we're working kind of both at sort of the Department of Social Services and Department of Ed to tackle that. We have done a variety of things. We've kind of used all of the existing listserv to let folks know about the financial resources. We've partnered very closely under the leadership of Kathy and the foundation, working with Smart Beginning. So I know both in the spring and in the fall, kind of getting those groups mobilized and sort of, you know, bringing those together. They tend to have the kind of boots on the ground in terms of the parent organizers who can get the word out there. You know, we've tried to kind of work very closely with the Family Dayham Association. I spent a Saturday morning 2 weeks ago with them, right? They're kind of closer to some of those families, figuring out how they get access to those resources, continuing to do analysis as we go into this third phase of CARES 3, who has not gotten it, right? And where are those underserved areas? Delegate McGuinn is the top priority. I think I want to sort of note this, you know, we still have a real fear issue out there. We still are hearing, you know, across Head Start, right, which is free and is comprehensive and is really trusted by our most vulnerable communities. If they're having an enrollment issue, like there is something going on in terms of families really afraid to kind of, I mean, it seems nuts that they might be on the playground, but not in Head Start, but I still think there's just some real fear. I know here locally, we have free childcare at Peter Paul and other places, and they're saying it's empty and we can't understand. I mean, we had this phenomenon in the spring too, when we looked at how many essential workers would be needed and how much childcare would be needed. And yet we built it and they didn't come. And so I think, you know, we've got more work to do there. And I know Commissioner Storn and Kathy and I are working kind of as we look at phase 3 and the kind of the biggest amount of money, the $60 million or more to support those communities. And I think it just continues to be, our work is to get them in. You know, I think we'll have VPI enrollment that goes through, for instance, January. We got to get them into Head Start this year. And then we got to really figure out how we, you know, address our services. Like we as the adults need to do different and do better as these kids come back, right, over the spring and into the fall. But we have to address the fear, because we will not have full enrollment until we address the fear.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jenna. Appreciate that.
Any other questions on part one? Okay, Jenna, second part of your presentation.
Excellent. I know. I feel like this is like, it's like a crash course. There's so much information. There will be a pop quiz at the end. Just if you'll move to the next slide, Tyler, I just wanted to loop back with this group on where we are in kindergarten readiness. We're not able quite yet to provide you what we know about the state of Virginia's kindergartners. We do know, and you'll see this enrollment data, you'll know more about this. We're roughly under enrolled by about 12,000 kindergartners across the state, which is sort of second only to preschool in terms of under enrollment, based on the fall information. We are not able to provide quite yet the kind of how are the kids doing, right? The VKRP, which is literacy, math, self-regulation, and social skills, because we've provided some flexibility to the field and getting that information in, so that we're still evaluating kindergartners as we speak. We have the sort of the biggest gap in math, because we're really requiring folks to do that in person. And so we're trying to figure out how we can get a good gauge on where kids are as it relates to math. We are hopeful that by the time session comes around, we'll be able to give you a more comprehensive picture, because when we look at last year's data, unfortunately, building on Delegate McQuinn's points, like we're already worried about some of our most vulnerable communities, our children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, our children with special needs, developmental delays, our dual language learners. And if you see here, kind of right now, race and demographics, language spoken at home, ability status predict kindergarten readiness when they really shouldn't be. And so we've got to, when we look at this data and we bring it to you in the beginning of session, really sort of going back to Delegate McQuinn's question, who's missing, right? Where are the missing kindergartners, and when and how are we getting back to our system and make sure to support their unique learning and social emotional needs, right? I really think when we've heard from folks who are open and we're looking at the social emotional, this has been so stressful on our littlest guys, rapidly being pulled out of school or preschool, and having to do hybrid and sort of half here and half there, having to adjust to, kind of doing virtual learning. So really being able to kind of address that. So we should have more information for you all come session, but you will have VKRP data this year. It'll look slightly different than last year, but you will have VKRP data. Wanted to go back, I know, to Daphne's presentation to let you know what we're doing. So Senator Howell asked about, well, how would we sort of sustain some of the really positive finds? And so in between when we came to you all and made budget proposals at the beginning of session and today, we actually got the results from UVA and the study. And so we are very excited that we're going to be able to use a combination of both federal funding. So we received a renewal of that preschool development grant and some state funding that you just allocated to support this program. So I'm not going to summarize the findings. Daphne presented those to you, but going forward, we are going to make a really important programmatic change. So we're going to take school teachers out of the system. They are mostly making kind of $40,000 more, have full benefits. And so we will only be providing the incentive to childcare and family day home educators, right? Who were really where we saw the results in terms of increasing the retention and reducing the turnover. Thanks to the $3 million that you all put back in the budget after being unallotted, we are able to include all of the PDG communities now. So that's sort of dramatically expansion of teachers, upwards of 3,000 teachers now this year. And so we will continue that for teachers. We will also continue to work very closely with the foundation and with EVA to measure the results. So this year we're trying 2 new innovations. And again, as Daphne noted, this is a kind of one of a kind in the nation, but we're going to try more frequent payments. One of the things that we learned last year is that providing 3 $500 payments you have more retention than 1 $1,500 payment. So again, if my math is right, there's the same amount of money, but really what these dollars do is they help folks address their immediate financial needs, like to pay my utility bill or something else, so I don't have to take the job at Target or Walmart. And so we think that more frequent payments can actually help drive up retention. So we'll have one group will get 3 $500 payments, the other will get 6 $250 payments, and just to see if that has a result on retention. We also are piloting a model to text teachers so that they know about the program, they're reminded. So maybe you're feeling financially stressed and you think you're gonna have to quit this childcare job, but you get that text that says, hey, in 2 weeks time, you're gonna get $250. And you say, you know what? this is what I really love to do. If I can make this work financially, I'll stay. And so again, we'll measure to see whether texting with information and even moral support for our childcare teachers will actually help, again, increase retention. And so really taking the $3 million in state funds, the roughly sort of 2 and change in federal funds, and running a program this year that we will continue to measure the effectiveness, so that ultimately, Senator Howe, we can come back with a proposal on how to kind of sustain this at scale for Virginia educators, so long as it works, right, in terms of it really kind of increases retention, reduces turnover, and has a positive impact on kids and the quality of the experiences. If we end up in a place where all of our childcare teachers are making, $40,000 a year, I think we'd be more than willing to forego this program. But up until that point, I think really kind of using this as a very smart research-based way to kind of help improve quality of experiences for kids in our childcare programs and family day homes. Next slide is, so just very quickly, Senator Howe noted we are on track. We lost about a month between March and April in response to COVID, where both Commissioner Storer and Superintendent Lane and all of our teams were scrambling to support the field, but then we were able to kind of get back in a virtual context, fully moving ahead, and we are on track for moving over the Child Care and Development Block Grant from the Department of Social Services to the Department of Ed. Huge shout out to DPD, to the AG, to DSS, to VITA, to DOE, all of the letters. Everybody has been working. It's actually one of the things probably easier virtually than trying to make everybody meet on Capitol Square, but we've been meeting weekly since April. We have moved over the Head Start Collaboration Office. So that's the office that used to sit at DSS and supports the Head Start. It's a kind of ambassador to Head Start in the state. We've moved over the staff that support child care improvement. Those staff moved over July 1st. We have a complete agreement on licensing, sort of that will move July 1st of next year. And we've hammered out the kind of technology and the staffing, who will move, who will stay. And we are working very closely to finalize in time for session the sort of the lead agency in the child care subsidy program. And as a reminder, we will not be moving all of subsidy. Our local social services offices and kind of the case management system will remain the same. We will just contract with DSS to do that. But there's a very detailed work group plan that's coming your way. I think it's roughly 50, 60 pages now if you want to get into detail, but everything is on track. And huge thanks to the various agencies of state government that have helped keep this on track and put us in a good place to speak with one voice under the Board of Education, the Department of Education for school readiness as of July 1 of next year. This gives you a sense of that timeline and all of the activity from the last time we met in March through to what's happened this summer, where we are this fall. I should note that we will have a new early childhood advisory committee to the Board of Education. That recruitment has started, and we're reaching out kind of across the state to make sure we have a broadly representative and diverse group. And we will we're again set to move everything by July 1 of next year. And lastly, and I'm probably way over on time here, but just wanted to kind of loop back and say, okay, if you were to ask me, hey, Jenna, as Chief School Readiness Officer, where are we as of December 1st and we're going into session? I want to kind of emphasize, and I know Kathy will speak to this as well, like this is a troubled sector. And I think Delegate McQuinn sort of talked about the missing kids. And I think that's definitely what keeps me up at night in terms of, even as we sort of get to a new normal with virtual preschool and other supports, like who's missing? And what in the world will we do when we bring these kids back? And if anything, if we look at the under enrollment, particularly for our younger learners, we have work to do. We've got to rebuild trust with parents and families. We've got to get kids back into preschool, right? We've got to catch up on some of the social emotional things that they've missed out because they haven't been able to play with peers or create, relationships kind of outside of the home. And we've got our work cut out for us. We will come to you likely and sort of say, if anything, we got to redouble based on what we learned from Executive Directive 4, but we've got to make some significant investments in early childhood. We need to get kids a 2-year preschool experience. 1 year is not enough. 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in a VPI program that prepares them to come to school ready, noting that, they've lost some time and they've lost access to opportunities to prepare them for school. We've got to support that workforce, right? I mean, if you look at kind of what Daphne presented and the disparities and really who has ensured that essential workers can work. It's our family day homes, right? It's our childcare centers. That is mostly our teachers of color who've been doing this work without health insurance for $10 an hour since March, right? And really thinking about how we kind of come back to you and ask for additional dollars to support this incentive, noting that it works, right? And we can demonstrate that it works here in Virginia. We will be thinking about how we address the kind of really the social emotional needs faced of our kids. We'll bring you the data. So we'll bring the VKRP data. We're using VKRP now in 4-year-olds too. We'll be able to bring you, say, here's what we know about Virginia kids, right? Everybody's got their anecdotal story about kind of a kid who's been impacted, but let us bring you the data and bring you our plan on how we'll sort of reorganize our supports and services to get more kids ready for kindergarten. And we are committed to making sure we have a seamless CCDF transition. I can't give Commissioner Storn enough, credit or props here for really sort of recognizing that this is messy and we're moving branches of government and it's, nobody's favorite thing to do, but we really feel like we need to be able to sort of to support this ongoing recovery that will certainly go beyond July 1st of next year, and making sure kind of family childcare, Head Start, school-based programming, right? There's no single provider that can serve all kids birth to 5. We don't care the name on the outside of the building or the funding source. Collectively, we're going to have to work together, the public and the private sector, to make sure that we are supporting a full recovery so families can work, and so that kids can be successful, and that we can avoid a situation that Delegate McQuinn talked about, like a lost generation of kids. Like, I just refuse to have that happen on my watch.
Thank you, Jenna. Are there questions? Thank you. That was very thorough. While you were speaking, it sort of reminded me of something that happened just yesterday. Since I've been chair of Finance and Appropriations, my multiple Zoom calls go something like this. I have a very useful program that you should fund. And my program, I know you have limited monies, but my program is more important than anything else you might be considering funding. That's kind of the way they go. Well, yesterday, I was speaking to the Council of College and University Presidents, and virtually all of them were on the call. And at one point I said, I knew that what they needed in funding was very important, but we must continue to fund early childhood education. And I didn't get any blowback. In fact, 5 or 6 of them said they absolutely agreed with me. So I think there is real progress that we're being made. And I think the importance of what you guys are doing is profound and increasingly recognized. So I do thank you. Next, we have Kathy Glasser, who's president of the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, and who way back in the Warner administration got me involved in this issue.
Thank you for that credit. And thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. It's such an honor to have a chance to give you an update today. Also want to give a shout out and thanks to Zach and Tyler for setting the table for this conversation today. So much to cover and so much has happened since the last time this group met, I guess about a year ago this month. We'll be giving you a brief update today on 3 initiatives that I think are indicative of how Virginia increasingly is utilizing and valuing public-private partnership in the early childhood space, and especially with regard to ensuring equitable opportunities for children. These are the mixed delivery preschool grant program, an effort to build the supply of emergency school-age childcare in the pandemic era. We'll look forward to answering some of Delegate McQuinn's good questions, and the efforts and implications from a task force that has been convened to help reimagine Virginia's childcare system as we begin to recover from the pandemic. Next slide, please. So if some of you may recall, some of the veteran members of this subcommittee, this committee has been interested since its inception in discerning how to best meet the need and demand for publicly funded preschool services. State-funded VPI serves many thousands of Virginia preschoolers and serves them very well. But due to some of the program characteristics and requirements, some of which gratefully are under some change right now, thanks to Jenna's leadership. Well, there's still many thousands of eligible children who remain unserved. So the Mixed Delivery Preschool Grant Program was launched in 2016 to try to test potential solutions to some of the barriers so that more vulnerable families and preschoolers could equitably access a quality program to help close the readiness gap. And over time, we've looked to and learned from many states that we're able to increase access, equity, and quality of preschool services through a robust mixed delivery strategy. If we'll go to the next slide, the mixed delivery program is designed to test strategies that solve very specific problems. So for example, I won't go through all of these on your slide, but just a couple to solve for the challenge of lack of space in some school facilities for pre-K classrooms that some communities have experienced. Mixed delivery utilizes available space and capacity in community-based early childhood care and education programs. And also to solve for the issue around recognizing that a bachelor degree and teacher licensure is not necessarily essential for early childhood educators to effectively support young learners, and both national and Virginia research are supporting this. Mixed delivery focuses on the most essential competencies for teachers versus a specific degree and licensure requirement. This in turn supports a diverse, talented early educator workforce for Virginia's increasingly diverse population, kind of reflecting some of what Daphne shared with us from her fabulous research around sort of the importance of the racial match for children with their educators. And then next, let's see, we'll just say that over the period of time that the mixed delivery cohorts have been underway, the purpose of the first four cohorts which started in 2016 and are still rolling out today was to determine if the delivery of public preschool services in community-based or non-school settings could serve as a viable alternative for families and communities. And if so, the mixed delivery preschool program could be a useful complementary program for VPI. In other words, give parents options while still delivering comparable child outcomes. And then with cohort 5, which is beginning just this fall, this is giving us a chance to build on the success of mixed delivery thus far by expanding access to a proven program and a 2-year preschool experience for eligible children, eligible 3- and 4-year-olds. So grant funds continue to flow to competitive community applicants who in turn contract with private and community-based preschool providers to serve at-risk 3- and 4-year-old children. Communities and the providers are required to identify some additional funds in order to more fully cover the cost of providing high quality care and education full day and full year for at-risk children. These community-based providers meet or exceed all VPI guidelines with the intentional exception of the teacher degree and licensure requirement, and they more fully support working families' needs through full day, full year services. I would also note, as I was noting recently, that of all the mixed delivery sites that have been engaged thus far, only one has closed permanently due to the pandemic. And it makes me think that, that's really, beating the odds and the proportion of centers that have had to close. And I have to think that sort of the systemic supports and the approach that we're using with this mixed delivery, will be a strategy that really stabilizes and hopefully provides some capacity building for our centers that are so desperately needed. Next slide, please. So what are we learning about mixed delivery? Some of you may recall that we had a comprehensive evaluation of cohorts 1 and 2, and that evaluation documented findings that in some tell us that mixed delivery works in promoting school readiness for children who are participating. Key findings included that the majority of children in both mixed delivery and VPI classrooms had language literacy and math scores that met or exceeded typical scores for their age group, not just at-risk children, but typical scores for 4-year-olds. in the spring of their preschool year. Matched children in preschool in mixed delivery and VPI classrooms had similar spring scores on average in math, literacy, language, and self-regulation. And teacher qualifications varied across the mixed delivery classrooms. That was intentionally one of the things that we wanted to test. And public school VPI classrooms, yet children achieved similar outcomes across the different settings. So those are some interesting and really important findings of some of the successes from the mixed delivery model. Next, with cohorts 3 and 4, we're learning more about how mixed delivery works and how it can work for families and communities, including how effective ways to, how communities can structure their decision making, how they approach financing of the program and the services, and what makes a community ready for mixed delivery. And then finally, how COVID-19 has impacted their operations. And two key takeaways from these two cohorts have really been that having a shared vision of how a mixed delivery model for families in the community could be successful in implementing the program. That shared vision has really been very important. And then also the flexibility that the mixed delivery funding has provided has really been essential for the sites to be able to pivot to successfully serve families in the pandemic with on-site services. Then next, with the cohort beginning just this fall, cohort 5, we call it, we expect to learn more about financing models that best support the cost of high quality care, understand more about family preferences for their types of settings, type of curriculum, location, hours of service, and also what quality means to them. We'll also learn more about what we can expect in terms of outcomes from children having a 2-year preschool experience when they're 3 and then 4. Of all the years to implement an expansion of a program and attempt to serve more children, we're experiencing the challenges and also the triumphs of offering a safe in-person preschool option for parents who prefer it, that provides enriching and supplemental supports for vulnerable children, while also making it possible for their families to return to work and to the job site. You know, really pretty remarkable and heroic the ways that private childcare providers, but either home-based or center-based, are the heroes in this era and are really, making it possible for children to continue to benefit from an experience like this and for families to have that work-life support as well. Next, this map shows that across 36 communities, and I should point out that the number of children engaged is still relatively small, but what we're trying to do is test out these things with, low numbers, sort of a low cost and low risk way of testing this out. But what we're able to find through, piloting it this way is that it's a scalable model that is really working. So just wanted to show that these are the 36 communities, which are really, close to a third of the jurisdictions of the state. This is where mixed delivery has become an important part of an equitable early childhood system because it promotes family fit. It helps community-based providers improve quality for all the children in their setting. It promotes socioeconomically diverse classroom, which we know is a best practice for equitable outcomes, and it engages and supports that importantly diverse early educator workforce. Next, I just wanted to show you a map that we could have if we were able to serve all of the communities that have expressed an interest in mixed delivery. So these show the additional communities that have either applied to be part of the mixed delivery experience, submitted a letter of interest, but we didn't have the funding or we were not able to serve them this year. But these additional 27 communities shown in light blue, if we were able to serve those, we'd be up to 63 localities and nearly half of the state that would be able to put a toe in the water for this, really, I think, important alternative preschool program, not instead of, but addition to the Virginia Preschool Initiative. We feel that if Virginia is going to be able to succeed in closing the achievement gap and ensure a strong start for all of our children, every sector, public and private, must be fully engaged. And we really need this mixed delivery program and our partners to fully deliver on Virginia's school readiness goals. Next, moving from mixed delivery to discussing emergency childcare in this pandemic era. During this kind of crazy year, there's been far greater recognition of the importance of accessible childcare. Initially, when schools were mandated to be closed, ensuring that essential workers with young children could find safe, available, and affordable childcare was paramount to getting health and hospital workers and then food supply chain workers, et cetera, to the front line. And now this fall, as schools are making decisions about on-site versus virtual formats, the need for families to have access to safe, stable, affordable childcare for children from birth through age 12 has significantly increased. Parents whose jobs require them on the front lines need safe childcare while they work, and parents who are able to work from home need help with supporting their school-age children's virtual instruction. Many parents can't afford to participate in neighborhood pods, and because of the uncertainties and characteristics of the virus, many are preferring smaller group settings for their children, like home or church-based childcare or opportunities. The impact of the pandemic on the workforce, the current workforce, has been dire. More than 30% of the female workforce, ages 25 to 44, has left work because of challenges with childcare. The pandemic will also likely result in increased adverse experiences for children and growing readiness gaps, with decreased access to the consistent and stable support services that are usually available for at-risk children on school sites and in childcare. So for all of these reasons, there's a critical need to expand the supply of safe learning spaces for children. Because the childcare industry was already fragile and not adequately resourced prior to the pandemic, we need to really convene, collaborate, and be creative to devise solutions for children, families, communities, and our economic future. And so with that, if you'll move to the next slide, the Department of Social Services has asked the Foundation and our Smart Beginnings partners who have experience in regional collaboration to assist with an effort to expand the supply of safe learning spaces specifically for school-age children through age 12. We are just in the process. We've just executed an agreement that will provide resources for phase 1 of this work, which, as Jenna mentioned, is that very quick turnaround of by December 30th, which last time I checked is this very month. And then also we'll have an opportunity for a phase 2, which would be providing some additional dollars through June of 21 to really push out. We're in the process of partnering with diverse leaders from sectors including municipal, school, churches, out-of-school time providers, childcare, business, philanthropy, to really put together these collectives at the regional level, collaborations, to be problem solvers and to very quickly identify safe learning spaces for these individuals. This is prioritizing, really maximizing the capacity of existing providers, as well as creatively resourcing new spaces, those other spaces that are being created to be able to fill a gap here. And we're honored to be able to do this work. It's a very quick turnaround, but we are committed to doing it well and making sure that we are improving access to these safe learning spaces, especially for vulnerable families at this time. I will say that what we're finding is, as been noted before, that some of the challenges have really been around identifying staffing, to make sure that there are those who can successfully support the children, whether they're there for full-time childcare or just for supervision as they're doing a virtual instruction. Transportation for families to these sites is also a big gap and issue, as well as technology like hotspots, laptops, headphones, things to make this kind of learning more viable. Dana, you mentioned, I think earlier, Peter Paul. We understand that they have space for lots more children and families who need and desire that space. One of the things that our Smart Beginnings partners through this regional collaboration is able to do is identify that the problem there is transportation. So figuring out what is a creative way to provide transportation for these families to get their children to where those spaces are available. There's also the opportunity to provide some shiro pay or some signing bonuses to get staff on site so these services can be there for young children. So it's been an interesting thing to learn that, I do think it's important to point out that the demand is there for all of these services, for more VPI, more mixed delivery, more safe spaces and childcare. But I think we are learning more and more that we need to be responsive to family needs and preferences. A blunt instrument won't work. And so it takes some extra time and trouble to identify why is it that we've built it and they're not coming. It's not because they don't need it. It's because maybe they need transportation to get there, or the classroom needs a teacher standing in front of that on-site service. It's just an important learning along the way. And then finally, I'm going to give you a quick update. Tyler, if you'll move to the next slide. Thank you. About a task force that has been brought together. The foundation convened over the last 6 to 8 months or so a set of leaders to elevate the importance of reimagining Virginia's childcare system. The members of the task force have represented these 4 constituencies: government, business, philanthropy, and communities. And the representatives have explored data, information, and perspectives to derive key findings and recommendations to better position Virginia for a future vibrant workforce and economy. Their work has been informed by a group of Virginia leaders in childcare, out-of-school time providers, state and local early childhood organizations and agencies, as well as by a group of national experts. And the members are asserting that a healthy childcare industry is an important and essential part of societal function, similar to transportation and higher education, and that the Commonwealth must view, value, deliver, finance, and account for a childcare system that's equitable, durable, and of high quality. The task force is putting forward a recommendation on the next slide, Tyler, that Virginia commit to a bold goal that by 2030, all Virginia families can access quality childcare regardless of their income. In order to meet this goal, it'll be necessary for Virginia leaders to commit to developing a strategic business plan for innovations and investments that are needed to get there, creating structures that are going to be able to sustain focus, commitment, and urgency over a 10-year period of time, and identify ways that key constituencies can contribute to the cost. This isn't a one-size-fits-all. This is not a system where it's completely the state on the docket for the on the hook for the cost. We need to make sure that there is a collaborative way of viewing the cost of something that where benefits will accrue to so many different stakeholder groups. The effort will bring together like-minded individuals and leaders from every sector, level, and constituency in a dogged effort to achieve access for all families, an accomplishment and investment that, again, will benefit all of us. The goal is well aligned with the charge of this joint subcommittee, and we invite and encourage your active engagement in the initiative. And you'll be hearing more information about the recommendations of the task force and next steps in implementation in the coming couple of weeks. And then in closing, like Jenna, we are seeing critical need and opportunity for investment and innovation in the early childhood sector, not overnight, but in planful, stepwise stages toward a fully functioning, efficient, cohesive system. This system must be built to be strong and stable enough to equitably deliver quality options for early care and education that address the needs and preferences of families for all of Virginia's children, regardless of income, zip code, race, ethnicity, language spoken at home. The critical areas for investment include children's access to quality services like VPI and mixed delivery, growing and retaining a talented, diverse, adequately compensated early educator workforce, and strengthening the capacity of the childcare industry. Now, in the pandemic era, more than ever, investment in innovation can help ameliorate the negative impacts of COVID on children, families, and early educators, build the capacity for and supply of safe learning spaces for children and families, and take steps toward economic recovery for the Commonwealth. We at the Foundation continue to advocate for thoughtful, planful investments, but it's now more acutely recognized that Virginia families, employers, and our economy cannot wait for an assertive commitment to equitable access to quality early care and education. It's a priority for families, for business, communities, for economic development, and it must be a priority for all of Virginia. Thanks to efforts like this joint subcommittee and the members' exploration and intention, we've been able to test out different strategies and programs that we know work and will both make an immediate impact and also will lead to longer term reform and really robust returns from your investment. So I want to thank you again for your continued leadership and for your attention today, and happy to answer any questions.
Good. Are there any questions for Kathy? Okay, well, Kathy, thank you again for keeping us informed and focused and on task. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That completes our agenda, except for, does anyone have any topic they'd like to discuss or suggestions of where you'd like us to go in the future? I'm not hearing any, but I have an email, sendhowell@email if you want to send me any in the next several days. Thank everybody for participating. This has been a very informative meeting, and we're now adjourned.
Thanks, Janet.